good evening, everyone, and welcome to TriVersity Talk. I am Steven Bloomer-Teague.
And I am Wendy Stewart Kaplan, and happy Thursday night, everybody.
Happy Thursday. Oh, it's always that exciting part of the week where the weekend's almost here. And
it's one day past hump day. That's how I think of it.
Absolutely. Once you're past hump day, every day's a good day.
Then it's all good. Well, we got some up and coming things to tell people, Steven.
Absolutely. So we've got two events coming up next week, one virtual and one live. So
I can't wait.
I know. We have a Meet Your Pride Center virtual town hall. Earlier this fall, we took a survey. We asked a lot of you to take the survey, and you were willing to do so. And we've kind of compiled those results, and we want to have a discussion with y'all about those results because we want to be a better center for you. And so please join us. Let us know your thoughts. Let's have a conversation. We greatly appreciate it. But afterwards, on 2 days later, on Friday, I believe May 15th, we have our first live event. Spring Awakening is what we're calling it.
Spring Awakening, but it's Saturday.
Oh, yes, it is Saturday.
You threw me there for a minute. Steve, I got so many things on my calendar, and it's like, oh, holy Toledo, did I mess up? Yes. You scared me.
No, it is on Saturday. We're having live music. We just confirmed Dan Ingleton will be playing. Yep. We love Dan the Sound Man.
We love Dan the Sound Man. That's his nickname.
Yeah, and so it'll be fun. We're gonna definitely keep up with masks and social distancing and all that good stuff. But come join us. RSVP if you don't mind.
Yes.
info@triversitycenter.org. I mean, worst case, if you can't remember that, shoot us a comment. I'll make sure that you're RSVP'd and all that good stuff. But I think that's all in terms of announcements I have, unless you have anything else.
I am roaring and ready to go. I am very excited about tonight's guest. You might remember her from the Equality panel. She is president of the LGBTQ Research and Communications Project at the Center for American Progress. And she was recognized as the National LGBT Bar Association as one of the best under 40 LGBTQ lawyers. LGBTQ plus. I always forget that plus, Steven.
Hey, what are you going to do?
Don't judge me. Without further ado, the one and only Sharita Gruberg.
Welcome, Sharita.
Hi, thanks so much for having me tonight.
Oh my God, it's so great to have you. And I left the plus off when I was announcing you. Just forgive me.
Well, Sharita, I've been looking forward to this for a while because ever since the Equality Act Town Hall panel, I was like, oh, I really hope Sharita will do TriVersity Talk because it's like all the follow-up questions that you had during the event. It's like, now I get my chance. So
it's perfect, Steven, and you can just fire away.
Oh, well, I mean, before we jump into policy and such, though, I mean, you are so accomplished. You're an amazing advocate. And I just wanted to know, does advocacy run in your family? Where did you get this streak?
Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you so much, first of all. And yeah, so my dad actually has been a lifelong advocate. He used to be a political scientist. And he actually wrote the first study on women in American politics.
Get out. Wow.
And he, in the 1960s, when he was first starting out as a professor, he occupied the university president's office with the Black students to protest treatment of Black students. And
in the 60s.
He was the only professor who joined the protest. And
wow.
So and was definitely raised in that kind of environment. My mom also brought me up to protest when I was in high school. She would drive me out every weekend to join the anti-Iraq war protests. So, I was definitely brought up.
Oh my God. It's first of all, it's in your blood. And second of all, I mean, it shows when you have two parents like that and they get behind obviously someone that, you just took it all in and now you're using it to make a difference, which is really incredible.
Yeah, I had fantastic role models.
Now, is anyone else in your family activist or?
Not really. I feel like in South Asian culture, you don't get a lot of kind of advocate folks. My mother always says she's so progressive, she let me go to law school instead of medical school. So that's kind of.
No, I know a lot of South Asians, and that is actually really very funny, right? Because you should have been destined for medical school, but you went to law school.
Right. So there's a lot of explaining in my family, like what exactly I do. And I'm not sure how much they get it all the time, but yeah, still supportive, even if they're not 100% clear on what my job is.
Okay, well, that's the follow-up question. What is your job, Sharita?
So as you said in the lovely introduction, I have the absolute privilege of leading the LGBTQ policy team at the Center for American Progress.
Okay.
And Center for American Progress is a independent, nonpartisan, multi-issue think tank. We are a bit different from some of the traditional think tanks that folks might think about, like Brookings Institution. Our former president called us an action tank. And I think that's a much better description. So my team doesn't just kind of do research on the experience of LGBTQ people, but we also come up with ideas for how policymakers can improve the lives of LGBTQ people and connect that with our kind of understanding of how Washington works.
Right.
Have an amazing communications team that helps us amplify our work. We have a government affairs team that has good relationships with elected officials. We have something called the War Room, which is our rapid response campaign team that can help tap us in with other big progressive movement organizations and help amplify our work. And so it's a lot of different hats in one. So some days I'm doing writing and research. Some days I'm on the Hill advocating. Some days I'm talking to press or folks like you to try to get the word out about what we're doing to other communities. So it's definitely a mix of different jobs in one.
So I'm curious, since we have a new administration and we still don't even have enough months in, but have you noticed a change in terms of what you're doing?
Oh my gosh, it's night and day. It's the difference, I think, in a lot of ways, is the last administration was very ashamed of what they were doing. Well, not ashamed, but didn't want people to know what they were doing. Were very covert and hiding their attacks, particularly against the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
Versus this administration is proud of the amazing work they're doing. They do a lot of community outreach and want everybody to know. I think for me, one of the clearest differences is around how trans people in shelters were treated under both administrations. And so under the last administration, there was this congressional oversight hearing where Secretary Ben Carson came in front of the congressional committee, was asked explicitly if he had any plans to change protections for transgender people seeking shelter. He sat there under oath and said no. And then the next day, it was revealed that they were putting forward a rule that would block trans women from accessing shelters.
I can't believe it.
Fast forward to a couple weeks ago, we have Secretary Fudge in front of this same committee proudly talking about the work that they are doing to ensure that LGBTQ people are prevented, not just protected from discrimination, but affirmatively working with people to know their rights and with providers and they're always looking for what else they can do.
Actively working, right? Actively getting out there and looking to make real results.
So Sharita, when Ben Carson, when they come out and they make these rules about shelters that limit transgender entry, how long does it take to reverse something like that?
It's a very long process. So thankfully, we just, because of the amazing public outcry and advocacy, people were able to block that proposed rule from getting finalized. Because once you have a final, that's when it gets really hard to undo. So he tried to hide it. He tried to, he gave us only 30 days to weigh in on this huge change. And advocates mobilized and managed to get, I think, over 60,000 public comments opposing it. And that slowed it down and showed so much opposition that they never succeeded in getting a final rule out before the administration left. And so then this administration was able to just yank it. And they officially did that a couple weeks ago. But when they get a final rule, like they did with erasing explicit protections for trans people in healthcare, that's a lot harder to undo because you have to go through the entire process, start
the whole chain
all over again, because you have to undo it the same way that they did it.
So
and
I
that can take
out a really good point here. It was public outcry. Okay, it never got to the end game. Okay, the plan was never executed. And when you have people saying, no, that this is not okay, and that is the reason people need to get involved, and we can all make a difference. I totally believe that. You know, people think, oh, I don't have a voice. Did you get signatures on petitions and things? What was the process of this outcry?
So this is I'm an administrative law nerd. It's my favorite thing in the world because this is the most direct way each and every one of you can interact with your government.
Yeah.
So regulatory administrative law sounds really complicated, but what it means is, let's say Congress passes a law that says no kids on the street at dark. Well, what does that mean? Is a kid under 16, under 18, under 21? Is dark after sunset? Is dark after 9? Are sidewalks part of the street? And so what that means is the agencies then do what they call rulemaking, which defines what the law actually means. And the fun part about that is any rule has to be open for public comment, and they were required under law to respond to each and every comment.
Love it.
And so for every proposed rule, every single person has the ability to weigh in. They have to have their input taken seriously by the administration and responded to. And in a lot of these cases, we can change these rules for the better to either be more inclusive of LGBTQ people. We can help provide evidence for why it matters. So for example, right now, there's a huge opportunity for everybody to weigh in. The president put forward this executive order directing every agency to have this equity framework, to advance equity in everything that they're doing. And until July 6th, everybody can weigh in on what that means. And so
what does that mean?
Yeah, so does it mean making sure that our healthcare programs are LGBTQ inclusive, that our housing programs are accessible, that we have programs for LGBTQ youth and job training? Anything that you think equity means that you want to see your government doing, you have an opportunity until July 6th to tell the government. And they have to read your comments.
Read your comments. Wow. So Sharita, if you want to tell, I know I'm asking very basic questions, but like here at TriVersity, if I want to tell my government something, what are the channels I'm going to go through? Am I going to write a letter, an email? Who is it going to go to? What is the whole process?
So there's a great website called the Federal Register. And so every single proposed rule request for information has to post to the Federal Register. You just go to federalregister.gov and you can search for comment opportunities. And so if you want to find this equity request for information, you literally just search equity. It'll be the first thing that pops up. And they'll give you all the instructions you need for how to weigh in. And, commenting can be anything. It can be telling your story, telling how this impacts you. It doesn't have to be super formal.
Right.
And it matters because they want to know this. The government wants to hear this.
I wonder how, with what you're saying, most people, and I'm pretty worldly. I had no idea that was where to go, right? I get lots of things to sign in the mail and to write to senators, write to council people, but I personally did not know about that. How do people find out about that?
Well, so there's a number of ways. One, you can do what I do, which is literally every morning read the Federal Register and see where I can comment. So a big part of my job is looking for opportunities to queer everything that the government does. And so I go through and I say, if there's a survey that they're working on, well, you should talk about sexual orientation, gender identity. If there's some kind of new funding proposal, how are you going to make it accessible to LGBTQ-led organizations? You can literally queer anything in the Federal Register. But when there's a really big, important thing happening, LGBTQ advocacy groups will do action alerts and help spread the word. So for the proposal to block people from accessing shelter, we worked with our partners at True Colors Fund and the National Center for Transgender Equality and the Transgender Law Center to set up a website that people could go to and comment on. And all of our organizations advertised it through social media and to our email networks to direct folks there. We're going to have, and so when there's really big things that we need people to weigh in and need a lot of numbers on, we'll make it as easy as possible, because we know not everyone knows to go to the Federal Register, but people follow our Twitter handles. They're on our email lists. And so when it really matters, if you're a mega nerd like me, read the Register every day and see where you can.
I love that.
If you're not, don't worry. Your local LGBTQ advocacy organizations will keep you in the loop.
Well, also, please reach out to TriVersity. Now we've all connected and we followed up from the equality panel. Loved hearing you speak. So now you can reach out to us. Steven does a great job. We have a newsletter. He just fills it with all kinds of information, how people can get involved with things. So thank you.
So Sharita, so we start off the Biden administration and we get this executive order right off the bat, and that expands Bostock, at least a statement that the federal government will expand Bostock beyond just employment discrimination. So in the aftermath, there was a lot of backlash, it seemed, from certain state governments. Could you talk a little more about that?
Sure. I mean, it's really interesting. That was President Biden's most popular executive order. It had the highest public support of anything he did. And yet you had some very vocal anti-LGBTQ folks who just attacked him so much. And this, I mean, it's not new. It's just the same attacks that we've been seeing in a new package. And as much progress as we make, as much support as we get, there's always going to be this really small minority who is opposed and feels threatened by the expansion of equality and rights. And so we definitely did see that. I do want to say, we are seeing a record in terms of anti-LGBTQ, particularly anti-trans legislation introduced in the states. And you could frame that as a backlash to the progress, but it's really not. All this is the same culture war that the far right has been waging since the 80s. But what they do is they plug in new issue here. And they don't care what the new issue is. It was, in the 80s, it was feminists were destroying the family, or the gays were destroying society, or whatever it was. And then, as society progresses and realizes this isn't true, they try to find something else to fill in, some new fear factor to create discord around. And unfortunately, they've now targeted trans children.
It's awful.
Yeah.
But it's the same far right extreme machine that just pushed, it was back in the early 2000s trying for a constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage, because if we had marriage equality, that was the end.
Right.
And then suddenly the vast majority of people in this country support marriage equality. So they lost that. People are not as familiar with trans people at the moment, but that's changing every day.
It is.
And I am confident that the amazing trans folks in our communities, the advocates that are standing alongside them, are going to fight this and win again, like we've done with every other one of their attempts.
Wow. It looks as if, and I mean, maybe I'm just being cautiously optimistic, that a backlash against what I considered the backlash, because it's like there's only so many times you can see parents crying in front of government officials before you say, what are we doing? And do we not have better things to do with our time? And so my hope is that this will backfire on these anti-LGBTQ politicians that think that this is a sound strategy.
I think even having the support of the kind of administration that we have now, we stand a fighting chance. But don't kid yourself for 1 minute. The other side is still out there, and they grew in 4 years. I'm not even talking Democratic versus Republican. I'm talking about really horrible politics against children, against people that they don't understand. It's like anti-humanitarian politics, and they are growing. That is the thing. I mean, the incident that we had with the Capitol before the last administrator got out, that it was completely disgusting and disgraceful. And I thought after that, okay, you know what, everyone's going to see the light. Well, it really blows me away that we still, certainly, and Steven, you know this, in places like Pennsylvania and upstate New York, they're still not seeing the light. They are still not seeing the light. There's not a day that goes by where you're not reading something in LGBT Nation. They're constantly covering articles in there about this kind of thing. It's very frustrating. If you were going to come up with a solution to this, Sharita, I don't know, a game plan to affect ways of thinking, what would your game plan be?
I would make the hate groups pay taxes. And I mean, it's money. That's what it is. As like, you look at polling, you look at public support, over 80% of Americans support LGBTQ equality.
Right.
Even medical care, transition-related medical care, 80% of Republicans oppose doctors discriminating against trans patients. This isn't coming from people. This is from very well-funded interest groups. So for one example, our counterparts or opponents, the Heritage Foundation, which is a far-right extremist group that is funding and the brain behind these attacks, their budget is 5 times the budget of my organization. Not my team, my entire organization. Wow. They have 5 times more money than we do. So what do they do with that money? They weaponize it.
Yeah, they do.
And it's not that we suddenly had state legislators across the country coming up with the same idea at the same time. We had Heritage Foundation, Alliance Defending Freedom, write this all out and give it to these groups, create an advocacy and campaign around it that cost a lot of money. And we don't have the resources to compete in terms of money. We have the resources to compete in terms of we're right. We have support. People are starting to see through this. And I think we're going to see what we saw in North Carolina. Like, so I'm from North Carolina, and they tried this. The extremist far right tried to block trans people from using bathrooms in the state of North Carolina.
North Carolina was the poster child for that whole act. Yeah.
And what happened? Businesses pulled out. The governor lost his reelection. And now we're seeing a wave of pro-LGBTQ city ordinances passing.
Absolutely. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sharita, what explains the difference between funding between Center for American Progress and the Heritage Foundation?
CAP represents the interests of people who don't have millions of dollars to contribute.
Fair enough. There you go.
But I mean, this is why democracy reform is an LGBTQ issue. This is why campaign finance reform is an LGBTQ issue, because why on earth has the Equality Act not gotten a floor vote on the Senate? Why is it that we have depending on the polls, 70 to 80% of people supporting it? It's bipartisan. There's no reason why this wouldn't get a vote, except for we have the way that our government is right now and the way that the Senate is structured right now. They don't have to reflect the will of the people that elected them and put them in there. And so, when I think of LGBT issues, I think of HR1, because if we do not reclaim our democracy and restore voting rights, we're not going to be able to pass the things that we need to improve the lives of LGBTQ people. And we're seeing that play out in real time right now.
Yes, we are.
Absolutely. So we come to the subject of the Equality Act and it being stalled in the Senate. And it passed the House mostly on party lines, which was a little disconcerting. But in the Senate now, we're not even getting a vote. Now, it seems like the concern, at least from our senator, is this kind of religious freedom concern, that this goes too far in kind of, I don't like this word, but it's infringement on religious rights when it comes to protecting the LGBTQ community. So Sharita, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, whose religious freedom are we talking about here? Because over half of LGBTQ people are people of faith. Every single major religious denomination, the people have majority support for the Equality Act and non-discrimination protections. And it's a false narrative that we have LGBTQ equality over here and religious freedom over here. Because what the Equality Act does is it preserves all existing religious protections. So under the Equality Act, churches are not going to have to change anything. They're still protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution. Religious employers won't have to change anything. They still have an exemption under Title VII. It doesn't change existing protections for people of faith. It actually also expands protections for people of faith, because it expands the locations that you are protected from discrimination under in public accommodations. And religion is one of those characteristics that's protected. So, I'm going to use myself as a Muslim. Right now, in a number of states, I am not protected against discrimination because of my religion in retail stores. Like, you hear stories about gun ranges and convenience stores putting up no Muslims allowed signs.
Wow.
The Equality Act makes that illegal. The Equality Act expands religious liberty. And yet that's not the narrative we're hearing. And so it's so absurd to me when we hear people say that it's anti-religion or doesn't protect religion, when we had the Faith for Equality Coalition has over 100 faith-based organizations in it across the country, across religious denominations. We have thousands of faith leaders who have come out and endorsed the Equality Act. And so I just deeply don't understand when people are saying it's contrary to religion, what they mean. The PRI did a study and found 89% of Americans don't think their religion allows them to do harm against others. It's a shield for your own personal belief, not a sword to impose your belief on others.
Right.
So are there any concerns? I mean, what I hear is like Title VI, this expansion of Title VI, and that like religious institutions will lose federal funding if they, have like a morality code of conduct in their in admitting students, or gender-based housing that would affect whether or not you're trans, if you could be in that housing. Now, to me, maybe that is in fact the case, but maybe you shouldn't be able to do those things. And that's what's driving this. It's like, okay, maybe you're right. You could risk losing your federal funding, but maybe you should change those things. I don't know.
Right. The secret to not losing federal funding is not discriminating.
Yeah.
You follow the rules, you don't lose your funding. And we've been through this. And it's not just against LGBTQ people. After the Civil Rights Act was passed, Bob Jones University wanted to preserve their ban on interracial dating. And that's where this all comes from. Yeah. The US government said, absolutely not. You're going to lose your tax exempt status, and we're going to go after you under Title VI.
Right.
And that's what they were upset about, because they thought their religious freedom meant banning interracial dating.
Yeah, and that was deemed unacceptable at the time. And we've certainly advanced to the point where discriminating against LGBTQ folks should seem much in the same way. It was like what you say. I mean, taking away money from people that deny your rights. It just, you know, I mean, it's not that you can't do it, but why should we give you money for it?
Right. You're not entitled to a government grant to provide a service. The point of the grant is to get people services they need. If you're denying the people in need of service, the service you're being paid to provide, that's a problem. Like, the point of the grant is not to pay the provider, it's to get people served.
Right.
And get people, families, what they need.
And taking care of people. You know, all this is going to make me ask you, what is the most challenging and frustrating about your job right now?
How much money our opponents have.
I kind of got that, right? It's just wrong. You know, it just is, it's just wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's frustrating when we have the public support, when we have, and yet they can kind of flood the media and flood the legislatures and create this false narrative that more people support anti-LGBTQ laws, anti-trans laws than we actually have. Right. It's really frustrating, and it takes a lot of work for us to tell the story. And I mean, what's worse is kids are hearing this, and you know, having your rights, your humanity debated by adults who are supposed to be elected officials legislating for the good of your community, that takes a toll. And it's, you know, we're not talking about abstract concepts here. We're talking about people's lives, and we're talking about kids' lives.
We're talking about kids' lives. We just had an incident here in our high school where someone on the school board, prominent on the school board, came out and wrote things on Facebook that were clearly, besides ignorant, anti-trans. And it was really awful. And they had a board meeting. And what blew me away was the parents that showed up reading letters from their kids about how bad a lot of them were made to feel when they were in the high school. It was good that this happened. Again, you talk about public outcry. I totally believe. I know you're saying your organization doesn't have the bucks that it should have, but you know what? There's something to be said about grassroots and people getting out there and opening up their mouth. And we were able to watch the meeting online. And what blew me away was the parents that showed up to, you know, support LGBTQ rights. Parents that read letters saying, you know, I've got 3 kids. The kids could be gay, they could be straight, they could be trans. They're my kids. I support them no matter what. And this is just wrong. And now, you know, and as Steven knows, they put in, and for whatever it's worth, they're now examining this in the high school. And at least they're looking at it. Right. And that came from that meeting. And, you know, TriVersity was very instrumental in the outcry of what this woman had said in the paper. I personally feel each and every time, and you've got to, when you hear that stuff, you have to go after the person that said it. And I don't mean a physical way. You just have to go after, you have to do what you can to stop it. You have to stop the hate speech. You can't just let it exist. It's not okay.
Exactly. And it matters so much for us to show the kids in our community that we're standing with them. Because if we're not, you know, if we're not speaking out and all they're hearing are these really hateful messages, that has a huge toll.
Right.
Well, I mean, nothing for nothing. You know, when I see some of these polls that come out that, you know, just show how the populace is against some of these anti-trans bills, I'm like surprised. I'm like, really? Because it does. I mean, they are masters of crafting the narrative. And it's like, and so it takes you by surprise. Oh, people aren't falling for this. That's wonderful.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right, Steven. But you know, so much. I mean, it started with, I knew those words fake news back in the beginning. I knew, to me, that was the beginning of the end. Because if you tell somebody that the ball they're looking at is red when it's really purple, that's messed up, and that's inverting everything and taking meaning away from everything. And you just take and you follow that forward, and you're right, the narrative that's out there that, you know, the majority are anti-LGBTQ, that's the narrative that places like the Heritage Foundation are pushing. And that is a narrative that has to be stopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's, I mean, you both are right. Like, we have the people, we have,
right.
we are the side that people support, and it's lifting up those voices. And that's what I'm really,
lifting up those voices. That is true. So when you, first of all, like, when did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
When I was in 4th grade, I was in Bangladesh visiting family for a while, and the only English language programming was the O.J. Simpson trial.
Oh.
So I watched it constantly because there was nothing else to watch. And for Halloween that year, I dressed up as the judge from the O.J. Simpson trial. Drag.
That's awesome.
So it was like my little 8-year-old self dressed up as Judge Ito for Halloween, and with like my hair slicked back, a fake facial hair, pillows under my dad had
years old.
robe.
Wow.
So that was, I guess, the start of it.
And it just, let me tell you, my journey to becoming an attorney was I watched this movie in 2001 called Legally Blonde, and a world of Elle Woods, and said, I want to be Elle Woods when I grow up. And the rest was history.
I love it.
So I do. Steven, I so love that story. That's so great. That happens to be one of my favorite films on many levels, because if you really dissect the film and how she gets into school, and then you fast forward to what happened with Laurie McLaughlin's kid and Felicity.
Oh, Felicity.
How all that manipulation happened to get their kids in the right school. Really, Legally Blonde was telling the story before anybody else was, you know. It was a big reveal, as they say. So you decided when you were really young that you were going to be a lawyer. How did you pick the kind of law that you wanted to do?
Purely by accident. I actually went to law school so I wouldn't have to do policy anymore.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Out in reproductive rights, and was doing kind of global abortion access work, and then landed, and I knew I wanted to work in DC after college, so I landed at the Women's Refugee Commission working on expanding reproductive health access in crises. But because we were an understaffed office, like, I got hired to do that body of work, but then ended up working on southern border family detention, unaccompanied kids, custody stuff, and like conditions of custody for families and children. And then got more interested in asylum law, and so decided I wanted to go to law school to do direct service, because I wanted to help individual cases. I thought policy is going nowhere. This is so frustrating. I'm just going to help like one person at a time.
Yeah.
Went to law school, graduated during the recession, and nobody was hiring fresh out of law school immigration lawyers because people had gone from the private sector to nonprofit pro bono firms, so they were full. So I went to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to do a fellowship for a while. It wasn't a good fit. It was too big an organization for me. So I decided to take the bar and try again. And while I was waiting for my bar results, a friend reached out and said, hey, Center for American Progress is looking for someone for a 6-month temporary contract job to do some research around policies impacting LGBTQ immigrants, which I had expertise with through a few of my past positions working with detainees and working with refugees. And so I got hired for the 6-month contract. I made a lot more work for myself because I got really excited because I love this area. And I was like, oh, we can do this research and this research and this research. And then built a project out on LGBTQ immigration policy. And my boss at CAP was just like, do you just want to stay and keep doing this work? And so that was 8 years ago.
Wow. Really, really great story. The path that you ended up on was obviously the one that you're supposed to be on. Your enthusiasm jumps right through this live stream. And it did at our equality panel too. That is a great story. I'm curious, when you were working at the UN, I've just heard this from people that they can't get things done because there's so many layers of things you have to go through to help people. And earlier I spoke with you this morning about, what's going on with the LGBTQ refugees that are in Nairobi in Kakuma 13, which they're really trying to get the information out that the UN, they're not helping them there. Why is that? Like, I look at this and it's frustrating for me. They had a rally. I've been trying to get even a journalist to cover this story. Why are they turning their back on this group of refugees?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak about what's going on with you, and I know, the humanitarian assistance.
Yeah, that's
the entire framework has taken a hit. Like, the U.S. is the biggest donor under the last administration. We pulled support, and we took in fewer refugees than we had since World War II. And so, it's this global resettlement system where we've never done our fair share. As a percent of the population, Norway and Sweden resettle way more people than we ever did, even though in terms of sheer numbers before the last administration, we were doing more. We could do more. The global need for resettlement has increased every year, but the countries aren't taking more people in to meet the need for safe harbor. And I think the U.S. just did a tremendous amount of damage over the last administration. We signaled to the world that you can persecute LGBTQ people and there won't be repercussions from the U.S.
There's no repercussions. You can just do whatever you want, right?
So we contributed to this global instability and increased persecution of LGBTQ people. At the same time, we slammed our door shut.
We did.
On people seeking safety. So we exacerbated the problem. We didn't help people. And now it's, I'm hopeful for this administration and the steps that they're taking to once again be a welcoming, safe harbor for people in need. But it's going to take time. And that's one thing that these folks don't have is time.
Right.
And so it's, we're in the middle of a pandemic that also makes everything harder. I was hearing that it's hard to get people in the pipeline because we don't have people to go out and because you have to interview in person to screen people for resettlement into the pipeline. And so it's just so many crises layered on top of one another.
One on top of the other, on top of the other. And then, we still have the border issue with people seeking asylum, right here in our own country. It just seems, when I think of the magnitude of the problem, it's daunting. It really is. You kind of hope that everybody will just do their share, that people will wake up. Somebody that we know, Steven, I mentioned about like what is going on in India right now. It's tearing me apart because I work in the fashion industry. That's one of the things I do. I work with a lot of people from Southeast Asia, right? And this virus is like, these are people I know. And what people can't wrap their heads around here, these are modern cities that are producing so many things, but the very computers that we're on, all the parts and everything, you've got 1 out of every 5 people that have COVID there. That is like, oh my God, what can we and the world do? Because it is a world problem. It's not over there. Everyone thinks it's over there. You know, we can be in Pennsylvania or New York City and Washington, and what is going on right now affects each and every one of us.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one thing that the pandemic made so clear. You can't, it's not somebody else's problem, because we are all connected, and it's important for all of us to work together on this. We can't just, you know, people fleeing persecution, we can't shut our gates, because we do have a responsibility. We also have a legal obligation. You know, folks in need in other countries, you know, thankfully we're getting this pandemic under control in the US, but as we saw, we can't isolate a disease. We need to have a global response.
Yeah.
And I've been getting so many fundraisers for trans and LGBTQ community people in India, because this is what happens whenever there's a disaster or tragedy. The people who are
hit the worst,
marginalized, are hit the worst. And
yeah,
our community over there is definitely suffering as well.
Yeah, I would say so. It's really I love talking to you, because you do, from your background, you can open up windows about the current situation out there, and you know, anyone that's watching probably learn things tonight. I know, you know, I certainly did. Steven, do we have any questions tonight?
So we do. So we have a couple of questions regarding some of the anti-trans legislation we're seeing, and I'm going to put them on the screen, but I also tried to do a little bit of paraphrasing. So do you think that the anti-trans legislation currently underway in these states is a shot in the dark to get some of these bills in front of SCOTUS at some point?
I mean, I don't know exactly. I don't think legislators are thinking that far ahead in some of these cases. I think they just think it's a way to score cheat points. And, you know, these are people who, there was a really great exchange on MSNBC with a governor who they were talking about, like, you know, your state is at the bottom in education. Your state is at the bottom of healthcare. There's better things to do. And what they're trying to do is have a distraction from the fact that they aren't actually serving their constituents and helping people.
If y'all haven't seen that interview, it's great.
It was amazing. I wish every reporter would do that. But, you know, I don't think this, based on how strong the opinion was in the Bostock case, I don't think we would have the votes, even on this extreme court, to uphold these attacks. They're so facially unconstitutional that, like, as extreme as some of these justices are in their viewpoints, I don't think we would have a majority of justices upholding it. That's how bad these laws are. That's how sloppy they are. They're driven by animus. We had the ACLU was in court yesterday opposing the Idaho ban that was the first of these, and it's been one of those cases where, like, they don't have evidence. You know, it's just motivated by hate, and that's not how we legislate in 2021 in the US. I mean, that's how they're trying, but that's not how they're going to succeed.
And that was in that interview. The reporter kept writing him. I forget his name, but he's the governor of West Virginia. Like, how many people are we talking about here? I mean, and he couldn't give numbers. So it's like.
But he was talking like, his guess was 11 people. I'm like, you're doing this, even if you think it's 11 people, like, what kind of person are you to target 11 kids?
Right.
As a governor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
I mean, so it's kind of reassuring. So even if it does get before SCOTUS, I mean, maybe, you know, that's not necessarily the worst thing if these bills are as facially bad as they are.
Yeah, and you can the Idaho case that's being argued right now, it was enjoined by a judge, and his opinion was really strong in that there was no evidence on the side of the ban, but reams of evidence about the harm that it was causing trans people in the state.
Right.
And so, you know, we are in a circumstance right now where 1 in 4 federal judges is a Trump appointee. And the judicial system is definitely not full of pro-equality judges at the moment. But also, these laws are so bad. It's going to be really tough, even in front of some of the most extreme judges in this country, to uphold them.
And so that's kind of an excellent segue and probably the answer to the next question, which is, what would the legality be of the anti-trans bill in Texas, where parents could be charged with child abuse for helping their trans child, and where healthcare providers can also be charged?
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to hold up in court because it's targeting the healthcare of a group because they belong to this group. And under the 14th Amendment, you can't legislate against the rights of a group and target them. You have a higher threshold of proof. And in order to do that, and we know that none of these states have been able to assemble the evidence required to justify these attacks. And so they're not going to be held up in court. Even in Texas, even in the Fifth Circuit, that is about as extreme as it gets. I can't see these. I can't see these going forward or lasting. But I mean, even when the courts overturn it, the damage is done to these kids.
So much damage.
I mean, I had a story from a friend of mine who was asking my advice because of my work with TriVersity. And she was like, I have this friend whose son is seeking to transition. North Carolina, 18 years old, just came out, but wants to have surgery. And she was asking what would I recommend to the parents and such, and doesn't this seem too fast? And I was like, if you're a kid watching the news where you hear that you might not be able to get any gender affirming care until you're 21, of course you're going to want to do this right off the bat. I mean, you want to feel like you're safe and protected before this legislation gets to you. Right. And then of course you're hearing the stories, and the child is also suicidal. And it's like, I mean, awful, but it's like, I get it. I mean, how could you not watch this and not feel just like shit? I can't imagine to be a trans kid right now, how crushing this must be.
Yeah. And I hear this from parents across the country who are worried, like, they have kids in states like Oklahoma, and they're worried about what are they going to be able to do to protect their kids, and how, it's already been a struggle. And on top of what they're, doing every single day to support and affirm their kids in some communities that are not supportive, then having legislators come and wage these attacks. If you don't have healthcare, you can't live in a place. Like my friend, Jillian Branster, who's the communications person for the National Women's Law Center, put it, and she's a great trans advocate, put it really well. That's like, what these healthcare bans mean is they don't want trans people living in their state because healthcare is such a basic necessity.
Right.
You can't live without access to healthcare.
Right.
And so the subtext of these bans is they're saying, like, you can't live in this state if you can't have access to healthcare.
Well, yeah, there was a story because of that, I think, from Arkansas. The whole family had to up and up move, completely uproot their lives. That's what, I mean, you're a parent, that's what you're going to do. But that is just, it's so unfair and so wrong.
Yeah, it's unconscionable to make anybody do that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but we're fighting the good fight, and like I say, I am still optimistic because when I see polls come out and people are like, you don't have better things to do with your time right now than to bully these children and their parents, it gives me hope. And people like you, the work you're doing gives me hope. And now we just need to see, if possible, if we have it within our means, that you're able to get enough money to match the Heritage Foundation. So Sharita, if somebody wanted to donate to Center for American Progress, where would they go?
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet. You can go to americanprogress.org and contribute on our website. Anything would be greatly appreciated to help us continue in this fight, but also wanted to share my gratitude for TriVersity and the amazing work you all do. You all are the information. You're how I hear what's going on the ground. You are the ones that are doing just like the really inspirational, impactful day-to-day work. And so also just so grateful for y'all.
Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, we totally appreciate you. You know, just based on what you said right now, how does an organization like yours pitch to get a big donor, someone on the level of Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos? There's piles. Sharita, you know this. There's piles of money out there. Piles.
I mean, well, my team's never gotten that money. I don't think we are going to. It's tough. It's
tough. Do you think it's because everybody is scrambling for a piece of the pie?
Yeah, I mean, this is why CAP is in favor of reforming the tax code so that billionaires don't get to sit on all this money and decide who gets it and who doesn't. Right. They need to be taxed so the money can go provide government services. So groups are not trying to provide services that the government should be providing. So
if that were to happen, then an organization like yours would really get good funding then.
Well, we don't take any government money. So right. we would not, but it would reallocate money away from donations to places like Heritage,
right,
and to services people need, which I think, even if we're not getting that, I think that's where it should go.
I agreed. Yeah, because we all have the same goal at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So, Sharita, this hour has flown by, and I have loved our conversation. But before we sign off, want to hand you the floor. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with everybody before we sign off tonight?
Sure. I mean, I'm just so grateful for everybody taking the time and for having me. And yeah, whatever you can do to show support and love for trans kids right now, and they need it. It's just speaking out against these horrible bills and showing support, weighing in with Senator Toomey to support the Equality Act. And it's really not enough to be silent right now as we're seeing these attacks. Mm-hmm. Our elected officials can't just stand by and do nothing. They, not supporting the attacks isn't enough. We need them to support the solutions and really be firm on the side of equality.
Well put.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sharita, and thank you everyone for watching. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And I'm going to give a quick plug to my baby boy, Bailey, who passed away this week. I love you, Bailey. You're my monster forever and always. And now wish all of you a very good night.
Good night.